Welcome to the Typical Sportsman Podcast. We're here talking fine-tuning your bow. So many guys, they either shoot it through paper and get her, shooting through paper pretty good, and then they go out and hunt. The conclusion of the episode, the paper, the tear that you're getting through paper, the bullet hole that you're getting through paper is not the end-all be-all. There's quite a bit that needs to go into it afterwards. Barrel shaft tuning, broadhead tuning, walkback tuning, you name it. So I'm here with Ricky Brule from Vaportrail, and we start by talking about different kinds of rest, how to choose your rest. And then what's going to happen is you're either going to put that rest at 13/16 from the riser, or the bow shop's going to hand it to you at 13/16 from the riser, or the bow shop's going to hand you a bow and say, we shot it through paper, you're good to go. There's still so much that needs to be done after that. So we're going to look at what to look for in your bow, how to know that it's out of tune. We're going to look at when to change what. Do you move your rest? Do you yoke tune? Do you shim the cams? All of those types of things. It is an incredibly informative episode. We end the episode by talking a little bit about different stabilizer materials, as well as the impact that tariffs is going to have on the archery equipment. Guys, I hope you learned something about tuning, but I also just hope that you'll be challenged to think about your tune. It is quite possibly the most important thing that you're going to do. So think about tuning your bow, think about what all goes into tuning your bow, and then challenge yourselves to tune your bow to the very best of your ability. Guys, this episode is brought to you by my good friends over at ScentLock, the kings of making whitetail gear. A lot of companies make a lot of phenomenal whitetail gear, but ScentLock really sets the tone with their activated carbon for maximum odor absorption. Odor is one of the most important things when it comes to killing a big whitetail. And is their activated carbon going to allow you to get away with anything? No, but it's going to be an insurance piece to help make sure that your clothing is absorbing the maximum amount of odor that it can be. Guys, go check out ScentLock. Their entire BE1 toolkit is just that. It is a toolkit built for bow hunters by bow hunters, and you're going to be impressed with it. I promise you that. You're going to like the clothing. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to keep you warm. It's going to keep you comfortable, and you will notice a difference in the odor absorption. Go check them out. ScentLock for all of your whitetail clothing. But guys, let's jump in with Ricky and talk about fine-tuning our bows.
For the true sportsman, it's more than a pastime. It's a way of life. Embrace the lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and the thrill of the wild. Live the life. Be typical.
Guys, there are a lot of names that you can trust in the archery world. However, not many stick out as much as the name Lancaster Archery. Guys, if you've been around archery or bow hunting at all, you've probably heard of Lancaster. Why? That's because they're experts, and that's because they're your one-stop shop for all things archery. I've never needed something and not found it at Lancaster. I've also been able to find reviews and tips using the product that I needed that Lancaster had. Guys, Lancaster is phenomenal. They are experts in the trade. They know the equipment because they use the equipment. And you can pretty much get anything you've ever needed archery related at lancasterarchery.com. You can also learn about the products you need on their YouTubes, in their videos, on their social media. You can also get tips about how to use the products. Guys, Lancaster is a phenomenal one-stop shop. And here's what I'll tell you. Sometimes you gotta be mindful of who you're taking information from. You don't have to worry about it at all when it comes to Lancaster. I put full faith in the guys over at Lancaster. They know the products. They sell the products. They give you advice on the products. They give you support on the products. You can call and ask them anything. They'll get you lined out. They'll sell it to you, and then they'll support you even after you buy it and you need help figuring it out. Guys, go check out lancasterarchery.com for everything you need archery related. All right, Ricky Brule, what's up, man?
How's it going, dude?
Good. How are you, dude?
Yeah, I'm good. Just
like we haven't done a podcast in like 10 minutes. It's
yeah,
been crazy.
Right? Just did a quick wardrobe change. And
for those of you who have never listened to The Range by Vaportrail, I would highly encourage you to go over there. Ricky's a fantastic host. And up until this week he's had really good guests on. But I was just on talking about the most recent bear hunt.
Your number
which we're not going to get
man.
into. Yeah. Which we're not going to get into the bear hunt because I want to share that. I want to give that its own episode. But if you want to jump over to Ricky's podcast, The Range, I would highly encourage you to. It's a fantastic podcast. Man, give us an introduction to yourself, dude. How long have you been at Vaportrail?
So I'm going on, let's see, it'll be 19 years in June.
Dude, you're old.
Yeah, I'm old. I am.
Man.
I'm getting there, getting up there, but I don't feel it.
Yeah.
And some say I don't look it, but I don't know. I might disagree. I got some grays in the beard, coming into the beard now, but
I looked like a child until I shaved my head, and now it's like, okay, makes sense. Yeah.
But yeah, man, I'm doing really good. Thanks so much for having me on. I just got out of the turkey woods, went out this morning, and so I'm going through the turkey struggle bus right now. I've hunted turkeys more this year than I probably have in the last 6 or 7 years combined. And it's just like the conversation you were having, in your last episode with Randy Newberg. Turkeys are stupid, and I'm sticking to that, even if it means I got to fist fight somebody about it. But I'll still, be an idiot and bumble out into the woods and see if I can't make it happen. But yeah, things are good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. How'd you get to Vaportrail? Like, how'd you get into the industry?
Well, so, grew up hunting, with a rifle, all that kind of stuff. Got a bow when I was 16, went to college, hunted with it a little bit, but not a ton. I wasn't really very good. I watched a video by H.S. Struck called So You Want to Be a Bow Hunter. And that kind of gave me the itch just a little bit. And I had a few kind of close encounters, but nothing real good. Moved down to Arizona to go to school, and I did a couple javelina hunts while I was down there, but again, no success, lugging around this heavy PSE Polaris, old teardrop string, just kind of a pile, but still flung arrows anyways. And then, so had some family stuff go on, moved back to Minnesota. Actually, I was living in Fargo at the time, and I needed a job. So I started working for Sportsman's Warehouse, and I was working, selling guns. But I was always gravitating over to the archery counter, and I was always hanging out over there. So just watching the guys work on bows and tune them, and they started kind of pulling me under their wing. And Ben Guttormson is one of the guys that I really started working with pretty close, and he's just an absolute animal when it comes to a bow. So I learned a ton from him. And then, so fast forward a little ways, now I'm a manager in the department, and then Sportsman's Warehouse decides to shut the stores down in the Midwest. So up to that point, I had established a relationship with the guys up at Vaportrail because they were just up the road. And so we would get all our bowstrings through them. And when I first started working for Sportsman's Warehouse, that's when they launched the limb driver. And so I was one of the ones who was fortunate enough to test drive some of the original models and be a part of kind of some of that R&D, giving them some ideas as to, how they can fix it or make it better. And so when Sportsman's Warehouse shut down, I started building bowstrings for Vaportrail, and then quickly worked my way into a management role in the bowstring department. And then it's just kind of gone on from there. I've worn almost every hat you could think of here. And the company was bought out in 2020. And then it was at that point where we had some extra dollars that we were able to infuse into our marketing department. And so then I was able to kind of step away from production and start doing what I really want to do and what I went to school for. My background is graphic design. So I became the creative director. And then now I also do all the marketing as well. So
very cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's and to give my listeners a brief history. If you've listened to my podcast at all, even dating back to the bear archery days, like I shoot products I believe in, and I work with companies I believe in. Vaportrail was no accident. Like I wasn't just looking for, a rest and it fell into my lap. Before my days at bear archery, I was a firm believer in the Pro V, shot it a crap ton, beat that thing to smithereens, and it always performed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I had always kept my eye on Vaportrail. Like I made sure and went by the booth at ATA every year and checked out what was new. And because I was a fan, they just work really well. For those of you that have ever listened to the podcast, you know I'm a limb driven guy. I will not tie anything into my cables. Don't care if you pay me to. I'm not going to tie anything into my cables because there's been too many times on the mountain, dating back to the QAD days, like. And I'm not saying the QADs failed. They make a fantastic rest. But if something does mess up, there's nothing you can do on the mountains to fix it. I don't have a bow press to put it in the cable. There's just a lot more that goes into it. Whereas with a limb driven, like we talked about on your podcast, you can find a shoelace and tie it back to the limb and be shooting. Mm-hmm. So I've always been a limb driven guy. Even to the point where when Trophy Ridge didn't offer limb driven when I was at the bear archery days, I just shot a whisker biscuit. I'm like, I would rather shoot a whisker biscuit than tie something into my cables.
Yeah.
And so really, man, and I knew Scott Bacon, Hot Scott, Sizzling Scott Bacon over at Dialed. I knew he knew you guys well. And so when I stepped away, I told Scott, I'm like, I need to get connected with Vaportrail. And he so graciously did. And I'll just say this, like, full transparency, Vaportrail does not pay me a dime. I just want to shoot rest that I believe in. I want to shoot rest that I know I can bolt onto my bow and spend, days in the backcountry and it's going to perform.
Yeah.
That to me is more important than anything. And so that is specifically why I went with Vaportrail. I didn't go with the Pro V though. Went with the Integrate 8. Is it 8 Integrate or Integrate 8?
Does it
matter?
It's the Integrate 8X. And actually the 8 is incorporated into Integrate, but that got confusing. So now it's Integrate 8X.
Integrate 8X.
Yes.
And I went with the X over the non-X for good reason. We'll dive into all of that, but it was no accident that I chose Vaportrail, just so everybody knows. They make fantastic rests. I had been a stoker. I had always wanted to try acrylic stoker stabilizers, never had before, but I always wanted to try them. And I do want to get into the difference between acrylic and carbon, benefits of both, downsides of both. If you've been following me, you know that me and Chrissy both, I went with the carbons on my bows. I do have the acrylics. And I'll get into why I chose them, but I'm curious to anyways, get into all of that. But we're here to talk high level tuning, man. Here's where I want to start. You get your bow, you get her set up. One of the best series I ever have done on any podcast, the single most listened to series ever done on my podcast, period, was during the bear archery days. Me and PJ Riley did a full bow build series. Basically, you pull your bow out of the box, setting everything up from start to finish. How do you do that? But we really didn't get into the tuning portion of it. I did have Caleb Sorrells on, who at the time was at Bear, and we did, a little bit of tuning talk, but not a high level tuning episode. So here's where I want to get the listener to. And the reason I want to get you to this point is because even if you don't have a bow press, and you had to take your bow to the shop, this is the point you're going to be at. They're going to screw your rest on. They're going to put you at 13/16. They're going to send you home. And you're going to say, well, they shot it through paper. It's all good. Your bow's not tuned. I don't care if they shot it through paper. Your bow's not tuned. Because first and foremost, you have to shoot it through paper. So anyways, you've got your bow. It's at 13/16. Well, actually, let's take a step back. I don't want to get to this point yet. Sorry, everybody. How do you go about choosing a rest and why? Let's start with that first, because in my opinion, the rest is the single most important part of your bow. It's the only thing that holds your arrow. I don't care how good your sights are. If your rest has fallen or failed, it doesn't matter how good your sights are. I don't want to say I coined the term, but I always say your arrow always hits exactly where you shot it.
Yep.
You say, well, no, sometimes it hits to the left. No. That's where you shot your arrow. So if your rest had moved, if your rest had fallen, doesn't matter where your pins are. If your rest has failed, your shot failed. So, and the same can be said about your sights. I don't care if everything's shooting good. If your sights are 3 feet to the left, you're going to miss the target to the left. Anyways, how do you go about choosing a rest and why? There's so many different ones.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think the general archery community relies on their pro shop to decide that for them. I think, and whoever it is that's tuning them is then therefore going to make that decision based on either what they shoot or, I know there's some shops where it's like, oh, well, and the only reason I know this is because, us being a manufacturer, we ask that question to dealers all the time. Why don't you use a Vaportrail limb driver? And it could have something to do with margins. It could have something to do, it's a lot of different factors, right? But I always combat that by saying, well, but what about the simplicity of the setup? Is that not more efficient? And then now you're putting out less money in wages to pay somebody to install that, whatever it is. So, from a technical standpoint and an accuracy standpoint, in my opinion, and I know a lot of people are going to think that this is biased, but the whole thing that got me to start working for Vaportrail was my trust in their products. And 100%. So I would have a very difficult time selling something that I didn't believe in. And granted, now we've had that happen in the past. We put out some rests that, we had some issues with, and the only thing we can do is do our best to try to alleviate that issue as quickly as we possibly can. It's no mystery. We had some problems with our Gen 7 back in the day. We've since fixed that problem, but yeah, so the point I'm making is that, just the ease of setup, the added forgiveness that you get from the limb driven technology, it adds additional support for the arrow during the draw cycle as opposed to a cable driven rest. And then again, to your point, if anything goes wrong in the field, you can actually fix it yourself. You don't need to have a bow press to fix it. And you're not just, SOL. We used to attend the Total Archery Challenge events, and I can't tell you how many bows would come off the hill that had an issue, and now they're cable driven rest isn't functioning properly, where we can just quick slap a limb driven rest on there. We can go over to the range. We can't get through the whole tuning process out in the field, but we're still actually able to get them to shoot well enough so that they're actually hitting foam so they can enjoy the rest of their day. And so to me, that's a testament of the simplicity of the product. And I think ultimately in the end, right, like if you don't know how to work on a bow and you're not really technologically in tune with how they function, to be able to fix those things on your own, I think is huge, right? Like if I knew that my car was going to break down and I could easily fix that myself on the side of the highway instead of having to call a tow truck and have them bring it to a mechanic and then have the mechanic gouge me for the price, like I'm going that route. The route where I can fix it myself, the user friendliness and the simplicity. So I think when it comes to choosing your arrow rest, I think those are a lot of big factors that go into play. I mean, some of these guys are, I've talked to guys that are going on guided trips, tens of thousands of dollars are being spent, and arguably the rest and the string are some of the most important products on your bow when it comes to consistency and durability, because when you're at full draw, your arrow is making contact with only two things, your string and your arrow rest. And if one of those things is off, your shot's going to be off.
Yeah. And you're still hitting right where you shot. But because of technical failure, you're not shooting where you're aiming.
Exactly. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, 100%. Now the reason that I like the V, I got that question quite a bit. Why not the old classic, not even old for you guys, the Victor just came out. It has the prongs that raise up from the bottom. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, the V is the single most fail proof. And the reason I say that, I've had guys who look at it and they can't understand the physics behind it because it swings down rather than than folds down. Mm-hmm. However, the cable that drops it is literally tied to the arm. So it's a more natural motion and there's no possible way of failure for that arm to go down. Unless you cut the string that is tied to your limb, there's no possible way that when the limb snaps down or up if you're connected to the top limb.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, there's no possible way, because of the way that it attaches to that V, that it isn't going to pull it down, because if this is your V and it's up, it's attached right here to the back of the V. So it's going to it has to pull it down. There's no possible way that it can fail again, unless I raise a knife up there and cut that line.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's the V is the most fail-proof movement of a rest. Now, the reason that I like limb driven, to further your point, if you're shooting a cable driven that locks up, or if you're shooting a limb driven that locks up, that means when that arm comes down, there has to be some sort of locking mechanism that breaks loose for it to pull down. And that just gives an extra step of possible failure. Now, trust me, I understand. I've been in situations where I wish my arrow was in a single locked position up and it wasn't, on my shelf moving, bouncing around. I understand the benefit of that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say one thing that I really like that Vaportrail does is the shelf sticker that you get, the arrow holder that goes on your shelf, has a higher U. So your arrow sits in there deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those are just literally a little divot that your arrow sits in, and it's not ever going to hold your arrow from moving or bouncing around.
Yeah.
You guys put an actual like half circle in there that your arrow sits in.
Mm-hmm.
So I can get away with more movement and without my arrow coming out of there. Now, if I'm crawling and stalking, I still, have to hold my finger over that or something. But anyways, I understand the benefit of that. But again, for me, I would rather have to hold my arrow still than have the possibility of failure.
Yeah.
Now, again, a lot of those rests function really well and you're never going to have a problem out of them. But what if you do have a problem out of them? Like, man, I would hate to have a stinking 370-inch bull right there. And that's the time my locking mechanism doesn't go down and the veins rip through the arms of that rest.
Mm-hmm.
I would hate for that to be the time. I would hate to have spent, thousands of dollars on an elk tag and gone on an elk hunt and you're shooting in camp and all of a sudden you have a failure and you can't tie it back into your cable. I would always hate that.
Mm-hmm.
So the benefit, and what I tell everybody, is have another rest in your bag that's set up and tuned perfectly. You can bolt it off, put it in your bag. And if that rest, if that rest blows up and it's completely unrecognizable, you can never shoot it again, I have a rest in my bag that I can now bolt on. I know it's tuned because I've tuned it and I've set it up, and I can just tie it to the limb and keep rocking and rolling.
Yeah.
For me, that is the most invaluable thing that I could ever have, is a rest that will not fail. Now, are there any, I've got a couple buddies, and the reason I'm asking this is because they've already asked me, and I'm not smart enough to know. I'm a dumb redneck from Arkansas. Is there any physics behind the way the V moves versus, the falling down of like a QAD or a Hamski or, whatever, all the other rests in the world pretty much. Is there any physics behind that moving quicker, getting out of the way more effectively? Is there anything like that?
No, I mean, the only thing that I can say is that, the part of the reason why we kind of went back to the old way with the new Victor is mostly just because of universal fitment. It's not as much because it's better. We have a ton of people ask us that. Well, what's better about this? Or to your point, like people have concerns about how the arm swings to the side. And like you said before, that limb is moving so fast and it's pulling that arm out of the way so fast that it has no effect on how the arrow flies, right? So in comparison to like a QAD, right, you've got longer contact, which there's a misconception. Some people think that that's not good. And it would be not good if it was going across a static platform. But because we have a free floating head, there's a spring in there that allows that spring to move and shift a little bit. And you can actually adjust that spring tension as well. So depending on the arrow you're shooting, it gives you another tool in your tool belt for tuning wise. Rarely do you have to use it out of the factory. Usually the spring tension is pretty good, but I have had some situations where adjusting that spring tension by like increasing it will help get you a better tune. And so again, if, with the oscillation of your arrow, it kind of cushions that and it just gives you a lot more forgiveness. So as far as like the mechanics go, the only thing that I would say with say our original Pro or our Micro Elite is with that spring steel blade. That spring steel blade actually gives you even more forgiveness in that area. We were concerned when we first launched the Pro V about that being a little bit more of a static, solid platform that your arrow rest is, or that your arrow is traveling across. But in all of our testing, we ran into no issues as far as consistency. Like we would test one against the other in a Hooter shooter, and there was no difference. We brought in high speed cameras so that we could see what was going on the shot, and we noticed no difference whatsoever. So, some people, like a lot of target shooters, you'll see a lot of them, they shoot, right off of a spring steel blade or a stainless steel blade, and so they oftentimes feel a little bit more comfortable shooting that type of rest. You usually don't see a Pro V style arrow rest like in the target scene. There are some people using them, but that's another reason why we also came up with the Victor 2, is we want to go back to those roots, so that we can appeal to those target shooters. But the biggest reason we did that, like I said, was fitment issues, because with the mechanism on the Pro V style Gen 7, Gen 8, the mechanism is actually above where your arrow sits at full draw. And so there has to be more material in the rest above that section. So we were running into problems with our arrow rest hitting roller guards, specifically with Matthews to start. And so a lot of companies were kind of bringing their roller guards down tighter to the burger hole. And so now we couldn't even fit our arrow rests on a number of bows. And it's just been throughout the Gen 7 series and the 8 series, it's been a huge headache trying to get universal fitment. And then we get a lot of customers, like retail customers, will come buy the rest, we'll ship it to them, and then they'll find out that it doesn't fit. And we try to put as much information out there. We have a fitment matrix on our website that shows which rests fit which bows. But again, we needed to make a pivot. We needed to come out with a product that's more universal, especially for the dealers. So it's just, there's a lot more simplicity when it comes to, trying to sell a product. And so that was one of the big reasons. And then of course we wanted it to be high end. We've had people asking tons of questions about, or not requesting, like, hey, we want bearings, we want micro adjust, we want, to go back to the traditional blade style. We added in, a thumb knob for the spring tension to make it simpler to use, all those kinds of things. So that's why we came out with that. But we also still have the tried and true. And the Pro V by far is our best selling rest, and probably always will be, mostly because of the simplicity and its price point.
And it's bomb proof.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
you can't break that rest.
Absolutely.
Now, before we get into the tuning, I do want to mention one more thing on the V shape of a rest. With the arms that flip down, there is always the issue of it hitting your riser. Like you have to have it high enough to where the arms don't smack your riser when it comes down. Mm-hmm. And just by nature, that has to hit something coming down. I mean, it has to stop at some point. And so it's a little, from what I tested, I tested the Hamskea Epsilon versus the Integrate 8X, and it was quieter. The Integrate 8X was quieter. And the only reason I think, again, I'm not a physicist, I'm not that smart. The only reason I can think of is because that on the Hamskea or any other rest of that sort, it has to be hitting something at the bottom. Mm-hmm. Whereas when the Pro V folds down, it's going into a cushioned, rubberized case. If you like it's got a seat of rubber that it's falling into. Yeah. So because of that, you can fully capture the shape of that V inside of a rubber, housing. Mm-hmm. And so it's whisper quiet. Mm-hmm. It is bomb proof. I will say on the RVX 32 Plus, I did almost have to call you and say, I got to have a different rest, because I was almost out of room to get my wife's bow to tune, because it was hitting that roller guard, but I got it to squeak out. Mm-hmm. There's just a hair of room there, but that was almost an issue there on the Form, had plenty of room, but on that RVX Plus, I did run into a little bit of issue there.
That's good to
All
know.
right. So they got their bow, 13/16 from the riser, arrow down the middle. What is the first thing? And we're going to talk super in-depth tuning. Like, you want your arrow to be flying, which everybody should. You should want, I don't care if you're shooting a recurve. Like, it's my pet peeve when people settle for a mediocre tune.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it's hard to tune a recurve, but like, if your arrow's flying crooked, it's so much harder. Think about it. It's easy to stab a pencil through straight rather than stab a pencil through a piece of paper that's going crooked.
Mm-hmm.
Arrow has to be flying straight. Don't settle for a mediocre tune. I said on your podcast, I will tune a bow for about a week before I lock everything down and everything's good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do it in a day? Sure.
Yeah.
I usually do it in a day, and then over the next week, I'm really micro and fine tuning and just making sure that arrow is flying perfectly. And we're going to get into all those things I do in that week.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get your bow to 13/16, what are you doing to really get that bow micro tuned?
So I'm kind of old school. I don't use a lot of tools. My tools are my eyes and my instinct. And so, I've tried to use the levels and do all that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, it takes too long. You know what I mean? Like, you're getting all these things cranked in, getting the bow put in a vise and all that. And even as far as like getting the 13th, 16th, I don't really start diving into that stuff unless I'm running into some problems. I'm setting my windage based on, I'm looking down the riser, lining up the arrow, and then, getting everything kind of situated there. And then the initial paper tune is going to kind of give me an idea of, whether I need to go one direction or the other. And so I don't do a lot of bare shaft stuff. I don't even really dive into some of that really heavy duty going down the rabbit hole stuff unless I'm having some problems, if you know what I mean. So most of the time.
Do you think that takes away more time though? Like, do you think if you would just work, and I'm not bashing the way you do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to this, I'm a recurve shooter, and that's how you tune a recurve. However, do you think it would save you more time, like to get everything leveled and to get everything set up, rather than on the backside having to take longer on the tuning? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying, and that could be the case, but most of the time, it's the thing I love about the limb driver and how forgiving it is too, and how easy it is to tune and set up. Now, if I'm working with another rest like a Hamsky or a QAD or something else, then there may be some extra tuning that I have to do on the back end that, I might have saved some time if I had, used all the tools on the front end, but it's not that often. I would say, less than 10% of the bows that I tune that come through the shop do I really have to do a deep dive on, to the point where it's like, now we're analyzing your arrow spine and do we need to add a heavier point on the front, in order to make this arrow, because there's nothing more crushing to a guy when you tell them that they're overspined or underspined and they just spent $200 on a dozen arrows,
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, let's do what we can to make this work, but at the same time, we're talking about ethical issues too. Like when you're saying with a recurve, it's super important that arrow's flying out straight. If you're gonna try to send an arrow sideways at an animal with a recurve, that's an ethical problem. I think you know what I mean. It's irresponsible.
Absolutely.
So we have to always be looking out for that as well. But again, so I'll start with my paper tune, and very rarely do I run into a problem where I can't get that arrow to shoot out of the paper. And that's just a starting point. So many people think that the paper tune is gospel, and it's not. And there's a testament to that. Like even with this form, and I don't know where you were at with it, but I have to shim the cam over to the inside in order to get it to tune properly. And I don't know if that's my grip, but then also I'll have one of my other guys shoot it just to make sure it's not me. And I've had to shift the cams over, just to make sure that tune is good. And then, like you said, from there, I just start, we always typically do a bowstring swap too. We're a bowstring manufacturer. So I'm typically doing a bowstring swap, and
Yeah, don't ever shoot stock strings, just so you guys are. I mean, stock strings suck.
Yeah, I mean,
Now, for those of you listening, I don't shoot Vaportrail strings, not because they're not good, but I have a really good buddy, Lewis, over at Dominant Strands that has made my strings for years. And but I am a firm believer in don't shoot stock strings. They stretch faster. They're built by the mass rather than built for your bow for you. They have a sheet that they can be X amount off and it be okay to put on your bow. Well, if you add up all the 16ths that they can be off, your bow could be not shooting near as good as it could if you were to have a quality set of custom built strings put on. So I am a firm believer in that, just so you know.
Yeah. And we can testify to that. We've done some OEM stuff for some manufacturers in the past. In fact, when Bowtech really first started to gain some steam, in the mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s, we were building all of their OEM stuff. And that was back when we were building customs. It wasn't like machine operated or anything like that. Everything was very specific, and every single set that we were building, was to spec, like right on the money. But now we kind of got out of doing the OEM stuff in the last, decade, simply because of that. You know what I mean? They're using inferior materials. They're strong arming the best price possible, and so the only way we can get them down to a reasonable cost that they're willing to pay, you have to skimp on the quality of materials, so there is something to that, right?
Can I just say this? If you have a string builder that is making the strings for another bow company, that's not a good thing. That sounds mean, but the best string builders want to build their strings the best they can. Mm-hmm. So to say, well, these guys make all the strings for so-and-so, that's not a brag. That's not a boast, right? Because they're not building those strings to the very best ability and the very best materials and the very best. Anyways, go on.
Well, and so not to come down on the bow companies. They're doing everything that they can. They're putting all this technology into the bow, and that costs money. And so in order to keep the costs low for the consumer,
right?
It's an area where they have to, get the they have to lower the, their bottom line. Right. So totally get that. I mean, the stock strings, they'll do the job. They're certainly not going to last as long. And, oftentimes what I'll do is, we'll tell a guy, okay, well, we'll get your stock string set up, shoot it for a while, and then we'll take it all down, put a custom set on, and put everything, peep, D-loop, everything in the spot that it needs to. So you've basically got two identical sets, and now your stock set becomes your backup. Mm-hmm. But honestly, we have a lot of customers that will buy two custom sets. They'll take the stock strings off and throw them in the trash. They'll break in a custom set and use that as their backup. Those are some pretty serious guys, but it's ultimately the way to go, especially if you're going to be doing some backcountry stuff, or you're going to need to be possibly making any adjustments while you're out in the field. That's the way to go. But so going back to the process, we'll get the paper tune and then just start shooting.
On the paper tune, hold on. Because you already mentioned you shimmed your cams.
Yeah. How
does a guy know? So shoot through paper, left here. How does a guy know? Do I move my rest? Do I shim my cams? Do I change my arrow spine? What are you looking at as far as, because you hear some guys that are like Alan Bolin. I've heard him talk. He's like, I always want my arrow dead center, so I'm never going to move my rest. I'm going to shim cams, yoke tune, whatever else. So what are you changing? What decides what you change if you have a left hair?
So essentially when you get to a point where you're making adjustments to the rest and your arrow you still can't get a clean paper tear. Mm-hmm. So, and that's happened with both of the forms that I tuned, and it may not be the case with the 8X because I'm with both of those bows. I've been tuning the Victor because I've been using that arrow rest for R&D and for creating assets and promotional material. So that's the rest that I've been tuning on those bows every time. And so with both of them right out of the box, I set the center shot up, and I'm with Alan on that too. I prefer that my arrow is tracking down the center of the bow, and then I will make adjustments from there. So like back when I used to shoot for Bowtech, and so I would set my center shot, and then I would yoke tune my paper tear. And again, I feel more confident with my arrow tracking down the center of the bow. Now with Prime, with this cam system, which generally speaking is known as what you'd call a binary type cam system. And Primes is better because they've got the inline technology, so when you get to full drop, pulls those cables in just a little bit further and centers everything. But typically your arrow is going to not travel straight down the riser in order to get the perfect tune that you need. Some people get hung up on that, but that's, like I said, with the Bowtechs, when they came out with the binary cam system that Kevin Struther invented, that is still being used across the board, most of the time you'll end up with your arrow tracking just a little bit outside. Again, it just depends. There's so many factors. What arrow are you shooting? There's so many different things that determine. So not every bow is cookie cutter. They're not always going to tune the same. But as I'm shooting it through paper, okay, I got a tear, so I'm making an adjustment to my rest. And if I'm having to make a significant adjustment in order to bring that tune in, that's when I know, okay, and it's kind of just a little bit of experimentation, based on the principles of the direction you would move your rest to get a paper tear to move. You would also follow that same concept when shifting your cam, because essentially when you shift your cam over, you're moving the string over. And so, but for some reason, I always get mixed up. And so then I'm like, okay, I need to shift my cam this way. And then I'm always wrong. I'm like, how the heck that happened? So then I shift it back the other way, and now I'm good. So, so that's what helped me determine
and
that
just
I had to do that.
And just to clarify, because we briefly touched on yokes, and then he went to shifting to cams. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, a binary cam doesn't have yokes. So if your bow has like a split in the cables, where it goes up to the cams, or if it's, one of the Matthews that has like the little ring in it and then it goes off of that, that would be your yoke.
Mm-hmm.
And you can add twist, to the left side of your yoke. That would be the yoke tuning of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, how many bows currently use a yoke? Like, are there any like high level flagship bows that are still using yokes?
The only one that I can think of, the most recent company was APA, but I think now they've gone to a similar yoke system, kind of like what PSE does, where you've got a yoke that goes around one side of the cam, comes down through a loop in the cable, back up, and then around the other side. I think that's their current system now. But honestly, like, I love the old yoke system. I always felt like that it's super easy to tune. I mean, like I said, with those Bowtechs, I had it down to a science where I'd put the cable, the single loop on one end on the cam, come up, and then I would attach one of the yoke loops to the axle, and then I would untwist the one side, and it would put the perfect amount of twists into the loop on that opposite side. So, because when you yoke tune, you got to have, you want to have more twists on one side than on the other to kind of balance that yoke out. And then I would set my center shot, shoot it through paper. And if I had a left tear, I could add a twist to the left side of the limb, or add a half twist. And then it would slowly start to move that paper tear in until I'm good. And so for the listeners that aren't really privy to this, essentially yoke tuning, what it does is it tilts your cam, which in turn is the same thing that you get from taking a binary cam and shimming it over. It effectively does the same thing.
Yeah.
So, So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Like I said, I'll get the paper tune and then we'll start going to the range and start getting those strings broke in, start getting everything to meld together. Cause it does, like even the rest needs to kind of get settled in a little bit.
We talk a lot about our favorite bows, about our favorite camo, our favorite arrows, and we invest a lot of money into the gear that we use. Listen, that investment does not matter if you're not healthy enough to get out in the woods. That investment of your camo does not matter if you can't make it up the mountain to where the elk are. One of the best investments you can make is investing in your health, investing in the longevity of you as a hunter. Guys, Mountain Tough is truly changing lives of people all around the world. It's changed my life. It's changed lives of people like Mr. Randy Newberg. His testimony about Mountain Tough is absolutely phenomenal. He's even partnered with them to help make a program for people 50 and over because he's so passionate about what it's done for him in his life. Guys, Mountain Tough truly is incredible. And I want to give you a chance to try it for 6 weeks completely free. When you use the code TYPICAL, all caps, TYPICAL, you're going to get the original 14 days free, but then you're also going to get an additional 30 days free, 6 weeks of free training. Give it a shot, give it a try, and just see. I promise you in that 6 weeks, you'll feel better, you'll perform better, you'll look better. Everything about your life will improve if you just give it a chance. If you don't like it at the end of that 6 weeks, no harm, no foul. But I want to give you a chance to try it free for 6 weeks. Again, Mountain Tough, use code TYPICAL, all caps, and try it for 6 weeks completely free. Going back to, because I get that question a lot, like guys will call me and they're like, dude, I'm getting a bad left hair. Like I've moved my rest as much as I can. And I'm like, okay, then stop moving your rest. Like take your rest back to center and let's look at something else. Mm-hmm. So I get that question a lot of like, well, how do I know what to move, when, and why? Mm-hmm. Well, if you've moved your rest so much to the point where it's like, okay, this is uncomfortable. Like my arrow is pointing, 10 degrees to outside of center shot. Like, let's take that back inside and let's change something else. Mm-hmm. Because what I've come to realize, like, and that was the problem. I think I talked about this on your podcast. I don't think I've mentioned it on this one yet. I had a problem one time with my wife getting good penetration on deer because of that very reason. Like through paper looks great. Like, and then honestly, my mistake, I couldn't get my wife to shoot enough, to go out and really get it tuned for her. Mm-hmm. So I got her to shoot it through paper and I'm like, all right, looks good. But I had moved her rest too much and I should have been yoke tuning. She had a yoke on that bow that she was shooting. Should have yoke tuned, kept the rest center shot. Like I made that mistake before. I got the rest so far out of whack to where it's flying good on paper. But then if you get her out to 30 yards, her broadheads are hitting, 5 inches to the left of her field tips. Mm-hmm. So that's what I will say. I agree with you 100%. Like I'm not to Alan's point where it's like, it has to be dead center every time. And if it's not dead center, I'm changing something else. I'll move my rest a few clicks in or out. But if I can't get it fixed with a few clicks in or out, we got to look at something mm-hmm. else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to your point, if that arrow is tracking way outside to get a perfect bullet hole, something is out of whack. And I'm not mm-hmm. comfortable with that. You know what I mean? It's okay for it to be, marginal, because I think that's just the type of system. I mean, you think about your cables are getting pulled to one side from your roller guard. And that's the one thing, if I could say, and I wanted to have this conversation with Brian, is they got away from the flex guard. And I feel like if that flex guard was still there, I may not have had to shim the cam, because you can adjust that flex guard in and out, and that affects how hard that your cables are being pulled to the side. Because I don't know mm-hmm. if you've seen those tests where you can. Bowtech did this when they first put a flex guard on their bows, and they would have a laser pointer on the end of the bow, and then they would mark where the laser was hitting the wall, and then they would take it to full draw, and you would watch that laser pointer mm-hmm. shift over to the left like 11 inches. You know what I mean? And so now you're having to compensate for that in your shooting. And so, But again, that's where we start. I don't really get too crazy with like, generally we'll get a peep put in the location that it needs to be, but like you were saying before, tuning is kind of an ongoing process. And so like with our customers, we always tell them if something is a little off or something seems wonky, we guarantee our work. Come back in, we'll take a look at it. We'll make the necessary adjustments. We don't charge you extra because we know things can change. Things, if you leave your bow in the hot car, or something like that, and something changes, something shifts, we want to be able to evaluate that, where most people wouldn't be able to figure that out. They go out to the range and now all of a sudden their arrow's hitting off or something. And now they move their sight. Okay, great. You're going to bring your point of impact back in, but now you're not tuned. So,
yeah.
So I like to get everything kind of generally set up, get a decent paper tear, and then we go to the range. I have the customer start flinging arrows. Probably don't need, I might do it a little overkill, but I'll be like, yeah, just shoot like 30 or 40 arrows. Have fun. Go shoot your bow. Don't worry about where if your arrow's not hitting the center of the bullseye, that's not the point. What we're looking for is that your arrows are stacking together.
Yeah.
Or if you're shooting at multiple spots, we're looking to make sure that every arrow is hitting roughly the same spot. And then we'll start to dial in your sight and all that kind of stuff. You got to get the strings broke in a little bit. You set the peep, if you set the peep up right away and you don't get any shots through it and you send the customer out the door, you're going to there's always going to be a little bit of elongation. And so that could shift your peep, so get shots through the bow first. And then we come back and we revisit. We shoot through paper again, and then make sure everything is good. And for 90% of the archers that are out there, 30 to 40 yards is what they're shooting. So we usually don't need to go down any deep rabbit holes to figure out what's going on. It's the guys that are trying to extend their range that want to be able to have the ability to shoot further ranges that we need to really start dialing it in.
And that is, real quick before I say this, I want to mention on paper, because you just said it too. Like, I've also seen dudes who are shooting through paper for hours, and just so everybody, I shoot bear shafts through paper. I don't shoot fletched arrows through paper, because if I can get my bear shaft through paper, it's just going to make the rest of the process a little quicker, a little easier, a little more streamlined. Mm-hmm. But I also am not going to spend hours and hours and hours, because it's not the most perfect of bullet holes. Like if I've got a hole in the paper and it's not ripping, I'm like, all right, let's go out to the range, because I know I'm still going to change it. Like even if I have the tightest, bullet hole possible, I know for a fact I'm still going to have to move it when I go outside. Mm-hmm. Because like you said, that paper is not the gospel. Do not take that to the bank. There used to be a bow company, I don't even remember who it was, that would send you like a bullet hole through paper when they send you the bow or something. Mm-hmm. And you're like, who cares? Like, cool.
With what arrow and,
Yeah, with what arrow, who was shooting it. It was a Hooter shooter, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyways. So I don't worry about that perfect bullet hole.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who have just shot your bow through paper and then you've thought she's tuned, let's lock her down and go shoot. And then you call me and you say, okay, I'm shooting really good out to 60. Then they start drifting left. Why are they drifting left? Did you tune your bow? No? Oh, okay. That's why they're drifting left. Mm-hmm. So once you go out, like what's your process of bear shafts with fletched arrows, with broadheads? How do you move them in correlation to where they're hitting? Like, how do you get that bow just absolutely money?
Well, again, then it starts coming down to, you can do string manipulation. You can kind of play with some of your timing if that's a way to get things going. When it comes to broadheads, I don't typically run into too many issues, and a lot of times it's difficult too. Usually you can identify any left and right shift in your point of impact to planing of some sort, and that depends, okay, if I ask them, well, is your arrow going left or is it going right? Which way was the direction going? Which direction was the wind blowing when you were shooting? That's a huge factor. Whether you're running 4 fletch, 3 fletch, the profile of the broadhead, if you're shooting a 2 blade, half of the time that blade is flat. So the wind has no resistance against it. And the other half, it's, it has resistance against it, where if you're shooting like a 3 or a 4 blade, as it's spinning, the profile doesn't change that much. So you're going to have a tendency to get more planing out of that broadhead. And again, very rarely do I have to go down that rabbit hole where we have to really start diving into fine tuning why your point of impact with your broadheads isn't the same. To me, it usually ends up having something to do with planing and the setup that you have. I think back to when I first started shooting, a high speed bow, I had an 82nd Airborne bow tech, and I could not get a fixed blade to fly through that for my life, for the life of me. But the fix to that was to move to a mechanical head, and then I started getting better flight out of it. So those are some of the things that we look at.
Now, let me say this, and I'm not, I'm not bad mouthing you at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know you're a tuner, but so many guys also are like, I can't get my broadheads to fly. Give me some mechanicals. And I'm like, that's not the fix. Like, the fix is not to say I can't tune my bow.
Mm-hmm.
Give me something that's not that's going to fly straight. Now I also understand exactly what you're saying. But so many guys are like I can never shoot, fixed blade broadheads. It's like, well, you can't, it's not that you can never shoot fixed blade broadheads. It's that you never take the time to tune your bow.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big difference. Now when I walk outside, I can almost always bet, I'm different than you, because I can almost always bet that my broadheads are either going to be a little to the right or a little to the left. Now, my backyard is very unique. I'm in Kansas, so it's always windy.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if you're going to tune your bow, find a day where it's the least amount of wind as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But my backyard is unique because I've got a privacy fence that really blocks a lot of wind, so I can shoot and tune my bows really well in that backyard. But I can almost always bet that if I go out, either, if I shoot bare shafts and fletched, either bare shafts are going to stack a little bit to the right or to the left of my fletched, and or broadheads are going to stack, 2 inches to the left or right.
Mm-hmm.
And you basically, for those of you who have never done this before, you're going to treat that like a tear. So what I mean by that is, if I shoot, we'll just say, for those of you that don't have a bunch of bare shafts laying around, I always, like, if I get a new dozen, I don't fletch 2 of them. I'm only fletching 10 of them so I can bare shaft tune.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of you who don't have a bunch of bare shafts laying around, which would probably be the majority, you're going to shoot fletched arrows and broadheads. If those broadheads are hitting an inch to the left, now inch sounds like a lot. You're like, man, that's bad. That's like move your rest a 16th of an inch, a 32, a 32nd of an inch, and bring those together. But treat them like a tear. So if your broadheads are hitting an inch to the left, you would treat that like a left tear. So you would move your rest to compensate for that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when you're tuning, I can't say this enough, and I don't even think we've said it yet. When you're tuning, you are not making big changes. You will absolutely cause your day to go downhill if you make big changes on a tune. If you shoot it through paper and you're like, holy crap, that tear is absolutely horrible to the right, I need to move it a half inch. No, you don't. Because then you're going to be tearing absolutely horrible to the left. And you're going to be like, wait a second. Make small, minute changes. Again, even at 40 yards, if my broadheads are an inch off, that's like a 32nd of an inch change on my rest. Very, 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 very little change. A click. Well, actually not a click, because you don't have clicks.
Mm-hmm.
A 32nd of an inch change, and it's going to bring those heads together. And really, you're going to move your rest, then, a click back the other way to bring her back into the center. Now, that is part of the reason. Let me take a big step back, because we didn't mention one of my absolute favorite features of your rests is the no clicks.
Yeah.
One of the best features ever.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing is it gives you infinite adjustability, and so there are some downsides to it, where they're, in order to get them to run smoothly, you might get a little bit of play in the knob, when you're locked down. But that's easily fixable by locking your lock screw and then just kind of tightening it down, and then it'll kind of lock itself in place. But aside from that, it's nice. And then there's less mechanism in there, you know what I mean, that can go wonky. It's a simpler design, so it keeps costs lower. So there's those benefits as well, but ultimately being able to have that infinite adjustment and not have to worry about, because there are some situations where you might go a click and now it brings you to the other side and then you go back. Mm-hmm. So if the not being able to get in between those two clicks can sometimes be a problem.
Yeah. I would rather have no micro adjust than have micro adjust with clicks.
Yeah.
That's just a personal preference. You hear guys and like, I'll never shoot a sight that doesn't have micro adjust. I'll never shoot a rest that doesn't have micro adjust. Good for you. But I'd rather look at the lines and, be able to move it exactly where I want it.
Yeah.
Rather than have to click it over, a whole bunch of times or like you said, you're micro tuning and that one click is too much. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the no clicks. I like it a lot.
The micro tunability, the advantage is more for the setup guy or the tuner than it is the end user, unless you're the guy that's doing both. But what is nice for the end user is that if you don't have micro adjust, if you don't have that screw in there that's kind of holding everything in place, screws come loose. You know what I mean? Vibration on your bow. I'll say it right now so I don't forget, but one big piece of advice that I try to give everybody is check your hardware frequently. Always check it, especially if you travel, check your hardware, make sure everything is locked down, especially modules on cams. I can't tell you how many bows I have come into our pro shop and I'll shoot them and those, that hardware is buzzing, and then you can look and instantly, they come loose. They do. It just happens. But what's nice about that micro adjust is if that screw does come loose, your rest isn't going to move. It'll only move if that knob is turned. And so it'd be really hard for that knob to just independently turn on its own, at least the way that our rests are set up. So that's the nice thing, especially for the end user. And then I just wanted to go back to what you're saying. I agree. And I'm glad you brought this up about the mechanical broadhead thing too. With that particular setup, and it's the reason I call that bow out is because super short brace height, like a 5-inch brace height. And that
was when Bowtech was just trying to get all the speed humanly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, and I've never been like a really big speed guy. I bought that bow out of necessity because I was actually shooting a Bowtech Guardian at the time. My car got broken into. I lost all my gear. So I needed to get a bow quick, and I found one discounted at a good price. But in any case, so I had exhausted everything I possibly could to think of to try to get this thing. And to your point, like there might have been something in the tuning that I wasn't seeing or wasn't able to figure out. And because I agree, I think you should always be able to get any broadhead to fly straight if you know what you're doing and you do it right. But in that particular case, I'm just like, I'm going to, shift over to mechanical, and that seemed to take care of the issue. And then I actually shot a mule deer. The longest shot I've taken at a mule deer with that bow and with that setup, it was 92 yards. So,
wow.
And I was shooting more than I ever have at that time too. So nowadays I don't shoot near enough to take a shot like that. And even at that point, I was like a little skittish about taking that shot. But my buddy that I was with, he's like, you can do it. He's like, you've been shooting a lot. I know you got this. And I'm like, all right, let's let it rip. So, yeah. And certainly a lot of luck involved with that because I was in North Dakota and the wind never stops in North Dakota. But in any case, that's kind of a testament of, how that setup functioned and how I was able to troubleshoot that situation in order to get my arrows to fly at distance the way that I wanted them to.
Yeah.
So
now, if you have to shoot a mechanical, well, are you a mechanical or a fixed guy?
I'm shooting a mechanic, currently shooting a mechanical. I was shooting a hybrid before. I was shooting a Grim Reaper micro hybrid. And I got those to shoot great. And then now with the relationship that I've established with Prime, I'm shooting the G5 Mega Meats. So
one of the greatest broadheads ever made.
Yeah.
The only broadhead that's ever been made better is the Dead Meat. But no, I'm a fixed blade guy. I shoot day 6 Evos, but if I'm going to shoot a mechanical, it's going to be a dead meat or a mega meat. I don't know why. I just, again, I guess going back to my point, I'm a fail proof. Like, let's make sure there's absolutely no room for failure. And so, and I understand, like, for those of you that I understand that advancements in technology on expandables are so great, or on mechanicals are so great, that you don't have those same issues anymore. But I was also in the industry when mechanicals failed all the stinking time, and they were just, new on the scene, and I had so many bad experiences with them. And so it's just like, man, if I can just make sure that my broadhead is razor sharp and flying like a dart, then there's nothing that can go wrong. Like, there's no. And I don't care how good a broadhead is. If you nick a limb with a mechanical, you are screwed. It's going to open. It's going to fly wonky. It's going to fly crooked. It's going to impact the animal wonky and crooked. Where with a fixed, and I know this because I've got a bush outside that's got a bunch of little holes through it, because I always try to shoot through the bushes. And just see, what can I shoot through? Can I shoot through, if I'm on a deer and there's some wheat stalk in the way, like what? Anyways, I just, not that I would, I don't want people to think like I'm just shooting through bushes at animals. But I want to know, like, what is this broadhead? How does it act if it nicks a twig or something? Like what happens with it? Anyways, so that's the only reason I asked. So what are you looking for? When do you know this bow is 100% money? Like, what is that end result?
Well, for me, and even for our customers that come into our pro shop, it's when their arrows are hitting, they're stacking well at their effective distance. So, like, for me and you, like you shoot, you like to shoot a bare shaft, and I'm the same way, where I'll always have a bare shaft on hand. Our customers that come in, usually not the case. And so that's why when we're talking about this, I'm instantly going to shooting a fletched arrow through paper, because that's all they have, and so, but again, to me, it's only important that it's going to, so a lot of guys like Midwest here, like I said, I'll go 90% are max range 40 yards. But we always encourage them to practice and shoot at a longer distance, aim small, miss small. You know what I mean? So again, it's all about, is their point of impact where it needs to be at their effective distance? And in some cases, you can have the bow tuned the best that it possibly could be. Like if me or some of our other, seasoned shooters here in the shop, you could have that thing dialed in perfect. And if your shooter is not shooting well, the bow ain't gonna shoot well. Simple as that. So practice is the biggest thing. And then even sometimes, like you were saying, you have to shoot it through paper. The person that you're tuning the bow for has to shoot it through paper. And in my opinion, when I get that bow shooting well, and I have a customer come behind the counter and then they shoot it and they get a wicked tear through paper, now we're getting into lessons and teaching proper form and how to shoot and how to follow through, pushing and pulling and doing all those kinds of things. I've heard some people say, oh, well, you have to paper tune the bow to the shooter. And that to an extent, that could be, yes. But ultimately, if I'm shooting it, or if one of our seasoned shooters in the shop, and we can even back it up by throwing it into our, we've got one of those Coopers, which is basically like a knockoff of a Hooter shooter, but we can set up one of those to ensure that we're getting a perfect bullet hole. And the only time I've ever really set that up is if I've had a customer that's we've gone through that process, right? Like they're shooting their bow through paper and they're getting a wild tear. And it's difficult to have that conversation, especially with a guy who feels like he's been shooting for a long time. And then, so they start to then think like, well, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm the guy who, needs to shoot with the proper form. So we have to pull out the little Hooter shooter and, eliminate the human error to prove to them that their bow is tuned. And now we need to start looking at possibly having a lesson, but again, when your max range is 20 or 30 yards, And depending on the setup that you have, how forgiving it is, that's how we determine whether we need to go down that road. If their point of, if they're stacking arrows at 30 yards, but maybe they're not getting the perfect bullet hole like I would like to see on my setup, because I know that I'm going to be shooting distance. We don't always get hung up on that. And so to me, the perfectly tuned bow is the bow that stacks arrows with the individual that's going to be shooting it at their effective distance.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what so when I know I'm done, like, let's sight this bow in and just start shooting for fun. When at 20, 30 or 40 yards, if I have bare shafts, broadheads, and fletched arrows all just stacking with each other, if I know those three are all stacking together, even at 20 yards, like if I can put those in in the bottom of like a bubbly can there, like then if all three of those are hitting, I know that bow is tuned.
Yeah.
Now there is something to be said too, because I wanted to ask you this, because this question was raised to me the other day. First off, on your episode, we raved about how Dialed fixed everything with the proof, except for one thing that absolutely sucks. Scott, if you're listening, fix this because it's trash. The fact that you have to take your sight off to adjust the first axis is just incredibly stupid to me. But the reason that I bring that up is because if I have those arrows stacking at 20, like I said, bare shafts, broadheads, field tips, they're stacking at 20. I start shooting and start sighting in, and then I realize when I get out to 70, they're starting to drift, down to the right. How do you know? But I thought my bow was tuned. Do I need to change something? Or maybe as my first axis is off, which for those of you that don't know, your first axis would cause as you scroll your sight down the rail, it would cause it to move, one way or the other, to the right or to the left as you scroll that down. So how do you know that? Like if you're shooting and maybe you go and you check the first axis and it looks good. However, what are you checking at that? Like if like you said, if I got everything shooting well at 20 and then I start drifting at 70, what am I looking at? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and I don't know, do you have to take the sight off to do the first axis?
Yes, because it's got the two lock screws on the back of the sight. Well, if you're shooting a Picatinny mount, you do.
Because, right here,
I guess if you got like a shorty stub, like you could get it in there, but are you shooting a pick mount?
Yep. I see what you're saying now because of the set screws. I got you. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You're right. But again, so going back to what you're saying, I call that the Christmas tree or Christmas treeing, back with, if you're using multiple pins, it kind of forms, this angle or whatever. Like, so if you were to shoot multiple arrows at different distances, and you'll see that they start to walk out. As far as like determining that's usually going to be, when it goes to setting up the bow and sighting in and everything, then that's when we start looking at that. You know what I mean? Obviously you want to, even before you start tuning, that's where there are some tools that are good to have in order to do that. I've got the Hamsky tool that you attach to the sight. And then you can, you get those adjustments. You can do your first, second, third axis with that. But that would be, ultimately, if that's what's going on, right? Like if I feel like everything is tuned and everything is lined up, arrows are stacking really good, and then it starts to walk, just like you said, that's a good indication that your first axis is off. And 99% of the time, the adjustment to that is going to fix it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If it doesn't, then to your point, now we got to go back and start looking at other factors. Maybe did my rest move? Is something wonky? Am I getting planing or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you talk about planing, how do you know? Like, how does the shooter know if my arrows are planing?
Well, one thing you can do to kind of fight the planing is to cant your bow into the wind and then shoot. because your arrow comes out of the bow, and in the parabola, it actually goes up as it comes out of the bow, right? Because it's got to meet your sight, because your arrow coming out of the bow is lower than your sight, right? So it comes out and like that. So you think about that curve, right? So now you tilt your bow into the wind, and you're actually shooting your arrow into the wind. So you're compensating for that slightly. And if your point of impact shifts now, so like if the wind is right to left and your arrow's hitting right to left, I mean, it's usually a pretty good indication that that's what's going on. But then try shooting and cant your bow into the wind once. It's going to drive you nuts. Your bubble's going to be all the way over to the side, and it's going to make you itch. But do it and see what your point of impact does. And that's also an effective technique for when you're out in the field. Like if you're out hunting and you're in some high wind, one, take your quiver off your bow, because those vanes are basically a wind sail. I never shoot with my quiver on my bow. And then two, in a pinch, if you're at full draw and that wind is pushing really hard, maybe it's not a good idea to take that shot. But if you take that shot and you can be mindful in the moment, you can cant your bow into the wind, and it'll reduce the amount of drift or planing that you get out of your arrow.
Interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Now, you say you never shoot with your quiver on. Well, before I ask you that question, just so everybody knows, when you're talking about the way that your arrow height changes, one of the most missed shots in archery is like 5 yards. And it's because they put their 20-yard pin on, and then they hit, ridiculously high.
Yep.
So if you want to shoot well at 5 yards, use your 40, 50-yard pin.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll hit right dead on. I can't tell you how many times I've heard dudes, and they're like, I was sitting against the tree or whatever, and a deer walks right up the trail 5 yards from me, and I, shoot him way too high. And I'm like, yeah, can't use your 20-yard pin.
Mm-hmm. And every bow is a little different, when it comes to that. I've had bows that, 30-yard pin, some that are, closer to the 40-yard pin. Just depends on the setup, but it's just important to practice it. If you think you're going to be taking those shots, like the Western Trail shoot, they just had it, I think this past weekend, and they do like 3-4 yard shots on butterflies and squirrels and stuff like that. And if you're not,
that's cool.
Like you said, everybody's practicing that. You go out to the range and everybody's getting their sight tape figured out for that yardage. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, what I was going to ask you, if you don't shoot with your quiver on, what do you do on like spot and stalk hunts? Do you just take time to take it off?
So it'll be in my pack, or like I'll have it kind of stuffed in my pack, but I usually, like if I'm on a spot and stalk, I'll usually have a pack, but I will dump my pack as well. So at a certain point in the stock. So there's been times where I've got an arrow knocked and I'm literally in my other hand carrying another arrow.
Interesting.
Or I'm moving my quiver up to the next spot and then moving forward. Or, usually I can keep it attached to my bow, but when I get to that point where, usually what happens is I'll decide on a location that I want to get to, and then know, like, okay, this is the moment where either that deer is going to walk out in front of me, he's going to come around that bush or whatever. And then I'll know that my quiver needs to come off here. Or if there might be another situation where, like I'm just strategically getting myself into a position where the deer can't see me and I just need to wait for him to stand up. So again, I'm not moving anywhere. I'm static. And I've just got my quiver on the ground next to me.
Very cool. See, I haven't taken my quiver off in probably 15 years. Mm-hmm. Like I haven't, different strokes for different folks, I guess. And I'll say this, the new quiver that Prime just manufactured is the greatest quiver on planet Earth. I have not had my hands on one, but I've watched tests, I've watched reviews, I've seen the weights of it. I used to think the airlock from Tight Spot was the best because it was so quiet and you could get it in so close. Mm-hmm. This quiver is even lighter. And I've seen Podium Archer do his sound test. It doesn't add any sound to the bow. Phenomenal quiver.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just my personal preference. It's not to say that you need to do that, but if if I'm out shooting and there's wind, I mean, it's crazy how much that, the wind will push on all the vanes of your arrows. And your bow is doing this. And it's like, and maybe, I've had people argue, well, maybe you need to get used to shooting that way. And for me, the way I see it is if I'm struggling to shoot, my confidence level goes down, and I want to know that it's my ability to shoot that's affecting where my arrow's going, not the wind pushing on my arrows. So
Right.
I'm going to stack the deck in my favor. I don't want that to be a factor in shooting. I've got some friends that shoot the quivalizer. Again, that's one that's doubling as your stabilizer. So, if you were to pull that off, it's going to change the whole balance of your bow. But I've also had those same people say that it doesn't affect them. And excuse me, part of that could be just because of the design. Now you've got your vanes in closer to the bow. And so maybe that there isn't that problem, but that's just a personal preference for me.
Now, before I let you go, I got to ask you, the differences, benefits, downfalls between carbon and acrylic. Carbon, basically everybody knows carbon for stabilizers. So you guys have acrylic stabilizers. What are the benefits and downfalls of each?
So, when it comes to acrylic, the advantage you get, and for Stokerized, we have that patented. So we're the only company that has an acrylic, like a true acrylic stabilizer. And so before we bought the company, Kyle Stokes and Sean Lutz, they were the owners. And, in the vibration studies that they had done, they found that acrylic was the best substrate as far as like dampening properties. So you're getting the benefits of balance and dampening in one, right? And so the downside is you can only go so long before that thing turns into a wet noodle. You know what I mean? And now you're getting, if you're getting weight out too far, now you're basically actually increasing the vibration of the bow because, that acrylic flexes quite a bit more. And so that's the downside of it. The only other thing that I would say, coming from some of our customers, their fear of getting acrylic is, it's oftentimes kind of glossy. And so they're concerned about, like in a hunting situation, that kind of giving them away, that sort of thing. Now, when it comes to carbon, it doesn't have the same dampening properties as acrylic. So that's really its only downside, but it's super stiff. So we use high modular, ultra high modular carbon fiber in all the rods that we have. And so they're super, super stiff. We're playing around with some things because with our target stabilizers right now, we're kind of falling behind on the curve when it comes to those, because now there's some technologies that have come out in the target space that are quite a bit better than what we're doing. So we're kind of playing around with some of that, but we've definitely kind of cornered the hunting market when it comes to that. We've got the SS1 offset bracket option, and then we've also got the stasis option where it's an offset bracket, but it also has a pivot in it. So it's infinitely adjustable. You can swing that pivot out. You can move it back and forth. You can slide it forward or back. So the ability to be able to slide it back and forth, ultimately mimics a longer stabilizer out there, but on a smaller platform. So the benefits of the carbon is you get super stiff and lightweight, and then you can add the weight where you need it or where you want it.
Now, is there any reason, because if you guys made this, it would almost be sexual in nature. Is there any reason you can't make a micro acrylic bar? It's just a little fat for me.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a possibility. Honestly, I honestly don't know for sure. We've never explored that avenue. And I'm somewhat embarrassed to even say that. I guess I would think that those guys would have explored that prior to us acquiring Stokerized. And what I'm embarrassed to say is that I haven't ever really thought about the fact that maybe they hadn't, and that's something we should do. So I'm glad you raised that point, and maybe that's something that we need to look into, because I've never looked into that. But I don't know if having a smaller micro version of it, if there would be an advantage as far as the stiffness goes. But again, to your point, now it might be a little bit better looking. You're going to have less, push on the bow in any windy condition. So that might be something we have to look into.
Well, that in and of itself is why I chose the carbon. I do think that the acrylic was quieter on the bow. the primes balance so well because of that center grip technology. You don't need an incredibly long stabilizer. I don't run a back bar on my primes. Didn't last year, didn't this year, just because they balance so well.
Yeah.
So I don't, that wasn't an issue with me. I mean, the acrylics that I have are a little bit shorter. I have an 11-inch carbon. And honestly, I didn't need that much length. The bow just balances super well. But I did notice, like I said, I'm shooting in windy Kansas, and I did notice the acrylic just being a little bit fatter. I think I was getting a little more wind push on it. And that's when I just immediately thought, I'm like, man, I really like the looks of the carbon, but it's a little fat. So if there was a micro acrylic, that would just be money.
That's something to think about, because we already have, I mean, we could use the same sleeves that we use for our carbon M1s to attach to those, if they, assuming they, because it's all kind of prefab. So we're subject to what is available currently on the market. Now, we could have probably a custom size rod made, but that's one of the benefits of the acrylic too, is its price point. It's got a better price point on it as well. But no,
and they just
I like
look
that.
Cool.
Yeah. And then one way we've combated the, some of the shine that's on there by, we've got our Illuma series where we actually Duracoat the acrylic with an earth tone type of color. I think we got 4 different colors, and then we laser etch, because we do all our own laser etching here in house. And then we laser etch a topo map into that Duracoat, and it reveals the acrylic from underneath. So when you hold it up to a light, you can see that, that topo.
The topo shines through. Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. Acrylic it looks really good. It's a really cool way to customize your bow. And I will say, I think it's quieter. I didn't do a test on the decibel reader with that, but I do think it was quieter and took out more hand shock than the carbon. Bows are so advanced these days, they don't have a lot of noise or hand shock anyways. But,
right.
Just my initial feeling, I'm like, I think it's quieter, and I think it is better. Again, just a little fat for me.
Yeah.
So I think if we could go, a micro bar, it might just be absolutely perfect. Now, one more question. This is going to get into the weeds here. Industry question. You're the first industry guy I've had on since all this happened, so that's why I'm interested to ask you, how will tariffs affect the archery world?
I think it's going to have a serious effect. As far as, I feel like it's going to be temporary. My gut tells me that there's going to be some sort of compromise at some point. I mean, both China and the US agree that it's not sustainable. And so the hope is that they come to an agreement at some point. I do also feel that there are other industries as well, including the farming industry, that are really going to struggle with it. And so I feel like even if there isn't an agreement made, I would hope that the current administration does something to compensate for that in some way. But who's to say? I guess we'll see. I understand the idea behind all of it. And the hope is that you're American made and it's not a concern, and honestly, it's gotten us to the point where we've considered, because even if you are American made, it's still going to potentially push back your production, because now all of these, bigger companies like medical contracts are huge, and as a company in the archery industry, we're small potatoes compared to some of these big medical contracts that some of these stateside manufacturers are dealing with. And so now they're getting inundated with all of these companies that want to start manufacturing stateside to avoid the tariffs. And, so it's certainly going to have an effect. I just think it's going to be short term. And like I said, and even for us, we're starting to look at even just bringing our own machines in and doing everything in house. Just to try to avoid any of that, any snags in that, because that's part of what we're running into with our Victor. We should have been shipping them by now, but we haven't yet, because our machinist kind of keeps pushing our POs back because of other like bigger companies, kind of stepping in and needing to get stuff done.
Yeah.
So
I'll say I do agree with you. I think it'll be short term, and I think in the long term it'll be better for our country. So I apologize if you can't order your shirts off Temu for 34 cents anymore.
Yeah.
You know, my kids are fully dressed in Temu. Like my wife's all about it. And so she's a little freaked out, but I'll say this, I think it's better for the future of our country. So I will take a little bit of this sucks for the betterment of our country. I do think that it'll cause a lot of people to question what they shoot and why. I think a lot of people are going to look and say, wait, I thought this was made in America. Yeah, all the parts are coming from Chinese. They say made in America because they're assembling it in America.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'll cause a lot of people to look at what they're shooting and want to support more of the American made companies, and more companies that are you know, being built right here in America. So I think for those companies, it'll do good. Like you said, there's still downfalls, even for those companies, you know, even for those companies that, you know, are made right here in America, there's still a struggle, but I think it'll cause a lot of people to look at, you know, where their stuff is being made at and support those that are being made in America. So yeah, I mean, it's going to have an effect on everybody, not just the archery industry, automotives, medical, everything, sports. I mean, there's going to be an impact, but
the biggest hit we're taking is on our packaging, because we've always had our packaging done stateside, and with the new Victor Rest, we wanted to kind of do something a little bit different. We wanted to step it up a little bit on our package design. And even if we were to have the packaging sourced from a company in the States, it ultimately gets outsourced to China. So, and the cost is insane. Even with the tariffs, we're still it's way cheaper to have our packaging done overseas than what it would be to do it stateside.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing, in our area. And it's gonna, obviously our price, no matter what, is our cost is going to go up, but we're not extending that cost onto the consumer, just because, especially with the Victor, it's one of the more expensive rests on the market right now. So the last thing we want to do is make it even more expensive.
Yeah. And, you know, it's no doubt that, I mean, we've already talked about it, you know, our shared love for dialed archery, and for all the people who have griped and complained about the price of their sights, all of those ones that are made in China, you're about to see, they're about to be just as expensive. Now, I've also heard it said, what's funny is you mentioned packaging. I heard somebody say, if Dialed wouldn't make, you know, the cool boxes, the cool tubes that the proof comes in, if Dialed wouldn't spend so much money on the packaging, their sights wouldn't be so much. And I told Scott that, and he's like, yeah, they're right. I mean, we could put them in a cardboard box and, you know, maybe, yeah, we would save them like $3.57.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm like, dude, you got to be stinking kidding me.
Yeah, it's a small price. It's a small price compared to, I mean, you know, we're giving people what they want. They're asking for all of these features, and again, they're not for everybody. Not everybody wants to spend $339 on a rest. I get that. That's why we still offer all the other options. You know, but it's just, you know, you get to that point where people are like, oh, well, I want micro adjust, and we want this, and we want that, and we want this, and that comes with a price. It's just the way that it is. You know, all these little intricate moving parts, all these little tiny things, it's expensive to make.
Yeah, absolutely, it is, man. It's not often that a new company comes along in the archery world and just absolutely changes the game. However, that is exactly what Dialed Archery did when they entered the scene. Pretty much took the archery world by storm, and for good reason. Now, if you followed me, you know my review of the Arxos. There was some things I didn't like about the Arxos. However, when the proof was introduced, here's what they did. They took all of the customer feedback. They took all of the customer feedback so well that I believe with the proof, they have created a perfect sight. They listened to what the archery world wanted and needed out of a sight, And that's what they got with the Proof. It is completely redesigned. It's completely in every way. It's just a better site. They have improved on every issue that people had with the Arxos, and they have created, in my opinion, an absolute bomb-proof site. Completely customizable on the website. Colors, pin configuration, pin sizes, pin colors. Completely customizable. You get exactly what you want right out of the box. Guys, I would highly encourage you to go check out Dialed Archery for your next site. You are going to get, here's what I promise you, you are going to get more yardage out of a sight tape. Now, for a guy who's relatively on the short side of a draw length, that's pretty important to me. I shoot a heavier arrow and I don't have an incredibly long draw length. So that rail giving me a little bit more out of my sight tape is something that's very important to me. However, all of the other features of the Proof make a bomb-proof sight. You can throw that thing around the mountain. You can drag it through the mud. It's going to perform every single time because Dialed has created, in my opinion, with the Proof, the perfect sight. Go check out dialedarchery.com for your next and your last bow sight. Man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on. I've wanted to talk tuning for a while, and figured no better time than now. People are getting their new bows, new rests, getting their new strings, and they're starting that process. So hopefully you learn something. Hopefully you'll challenge yourself in the way that you think about tuning and it not just being an afterthought. It should be one of your number one priorities. I'll say this. I shared this with Ricky before. Because of how well it was responded to, just so you know what we do every year before convention, before the Pope and Young convention, we do a full podcast kind of covering, what day seminars are, breakout sessions, auction items, just everything. And every year I give the listener a code word or a code phrase to use. And if they tell me that at convention, then they get, a prize. They get some money at the Pope and Young store. So this year I effectively made that code phrase, keep the dusty side up, because of my, the gentleman that I met in Idaho that was drunk on a bar porch, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, told me and my friends to keep the dusty side up. He said it as a term of endearment. I had no idea what it meant. Still don't. That was several years ago. And for years, like it became this thing around town. Like people would tell me, keep the dusty side up because they'd heard me share the story. Because he used it as a term of endearment, that's how I'm going to use it. That's my new sign off on the podcast. So guys, thank you so much for listening. You guys go out and keep the dusty side up.